Good morning. We'd like to call to order the De La Guerra Plaza Revitalization Advisory Committee meeting of February 26, 2021. We will start with a roll call, please.
Chair Sneddon.
Present.
Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Here.
Commissioner Drury.
Here.
Commissioner House.
Howell or House?
House.
Well, if that's my name, I'm here.
My apologies on the mispronunciation.
That's okay.
Commissioner Reed.
Here.
Commissioner Longstreet.
Here.
Councilmember Harmon.
Here.
Commissioner Perry.
Here.
Committee Member Peterson.
Here.
Committee Member Edelman. Okay.
Not present. Yeah. And can I confirm, usually at roll call, we see people's faces for just a moment. Is everybody only in by telephone today? Or are some people here by camera? Hello, Mr. Wiscombe, Mr. House.
Oh my Lord.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful for the public and helpful for me as well. Thank you. And with that, we will, are there any announcements before we begin?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Drew.
May I chime in first? I have to leave a little bit before 10 because my 107-year-old mother is getting her first vaccination.
Congratulations.
I know.
Okay.
I just had my last one yesterday. I'm taking my mom in today. So I'll be gone
Great.
a little bit before 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay. I can't promise. I don't think that we'll be done before then. So if you have, we'll be sure to remind me and we'll check in if you have last comments before you need to go, because we really do need to hear from you. So
thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, and with that, then I will hand it over to Mr. Hess for any agenda changes, review.
No, Madam Chair, no
Okay.
changes.
Thank you. So then I'd like to really just sort of set the tone for our next item here. This process is going through the process, the public process. We unanimously approved our concept, sent it on to HLC, Historic Landmarks Commission. They then discussed the preliminary concept and provided us feedback. What I'd like to do today is let Mr. Hess, invite Mr. Hess to please go through all of the comments. There are a few, and we're going to really need to discuss them. So let's get through them first, and we'll definitely allow time for substantial discussion and recommendations from there. So unless there are any other comments before we begin, Mr. Hess, please.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to ask if Leaf, if you would please, let's start the presentation slideshow. Thank you. That's perfect. Trying to get my screen organized here. So again, welcome everyone and thank you. This has been a busy week with much to consider. We debriefed as a design team after the Historic Landmarks Commission meeting this past week. And as Chair Sneddon just alluded to, it's really just some of this is about understanding that this really is truly a process and that overall we are heading in the right direction, but we have much to talk about. We have a lot to agree with HLC about, and as a committee we have several things today to go a little bit deeper and discuss. So as we're discussing all the issues today, our job is to take that feedback from HLC, work with it in light of all the information that we've discussed over the past 15 months. And then I'd like to understand where we stand on some of these issues and how strongly we feel about them and recall why they were in the plan to begin with. But it's not necessarily to defend what we've done because, again, as Chair Sneddon said, this is a process, but rather take a fresh look based on that feedback and then decide how best to move the ideas we feel strongly about forward with the Historic Landmarks Commission. I'd also like to say that trying to navigate this is certainly challenging, and we don't want to end up just doing a back and forth with HLC. So BB Longstreet suggested very wisely that we consider having a work session with HLC and the advisory committee to dig into not only the concepts that we're discussing today, but also the many that we didn't have time for in our presentation with them. Excuse me. So we've asked community development to look into this for us, and they are. So stay tuned on that possibility. But I really feel like that could end up being very fruitful for this entire process. So if we could move to slide 2, please. So today we're going to discuss the feedback, as we said, from HLC. And if we have any time left, we can look at some high-level concept ideas for the landscaping in front of City Hall on the Anacapa side. Next slide, please. So we've broken this down into 3 categories of feedback. The green represents those concepts that we were in agreement or in general agreement with HLC. The orange are those concepts that need to be studied, modified, and or refined. And the red are those concepts with which HLC had issues. So looking at the green back at the top, generally the arcade and the stage were well received, although placement and architecture still very much need to be defined and refined. It's a freestanding arcade as opposed to one that is attached to the building, which means it will take on a different characteristic than a normal arcade. But generally, this was positively received. There was, thankfully, consensus from everyone regarding the full street closure to make it pedestrian only, no grass, and a uniform level surface. Now, the only caveat to this is that we still need to address the parking demand from Anacapa for both the businesses and the business that happens at City Hall. And this will definitely need to be addressed once we have more information down the road. So going to the orange section, we decided to change the terminology a bit and call this a water feature rather than a splash pad. The concept is one we as a committee agreed was a good idea for the space, and HLC's response was that if it weren't so pronounced and made much more invisible, then it could be considered. So we'll discuss more of that in a bit. HLC suggested that instead of the 2 focal points, perhaps we should consider a more traditional fountain in the middle. Regarding trees, they suggested more traditional species and to consider making the placement of the trees feel more random and not so linear. And finally, the red section. Several HLC members felt pretty strongly about the splash pad, which we're now going, again, to call the water feature, as to its appropriateness, its size, and the placement. HLC made it clear they want a stronger connection to Casa de la Guerra, and the pattern depicted on the concept plan they felt was way too busy and resembled more of a plaid rather than something more simple. So that was the direction, is to simplify the design. So slide 4, please. Excuse me. So based on this, here are the discussion points generally for today. And we're going to go through each one and then follow that each point with a discussion before we move on to the next. I think it'll help clarify our discussion. But prior to starting, I've outlined what we've heard at the HLC meeting, but at the risk of putting them on the spot, I'd like to also give Mr. Drury and Mr. Howes, our 2 members from HLC, really just an opportunity to let us know their thoughts and help us understand their perspective on how the HLC meeting went. So if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Drury or Mr. Howes, would you please give us your thoughts?
Madam Chair, shall I go first as being a D instead of an H?
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. House. So we were in agreement about the simplification of the design. The design would be part of the visual access to the Casa de la Guerra across the street. the water feature, I imagine Mr. Hess and Leaf probably just went, oh, how terrible. Because we had, discussed it in the advisory committee meetings. When it came time for the HLC, I had been through about 2 weeks earlier a discussion for the Ortega Park, and it seems to me that the problem is that a water feature of that scale and that activity is not part of a park or a plaza. And so I came down pretty strongly on not having a water feature in that place at all. And I think the idea of a fountain, a traditional fountain with running water, is the only way I would like to see a water feature. Just a moment. Just a moment. I'm sorry. I'll sign off for a moment. Let Mr. House. My mother just called. Hang on. I'll be back.
Say hi to Mom for me. Let's see. Yeah, I would agree with what he's saying. I would say about the splash pad that I somewhat came to defense of the splash pad, recognizing that it was something that there was a lot of public input desirous of something like that. But I would also have to agree with the rest of the commission that there's too much emphasis on it and that this is a civic plaza and not a playground or a park. There was a suggestion that the water jets could be incorporated into the plaza as long as they're not a focal point. As far as a fountain, concerns were expressed, of course, that we seem to be in a never-ending drought, and is it appropriate to have a fountain, and is it also a liability to have a pool of water? And it was suggested that it could be a fountain that does not have a pool. It has water running down it. There could be some very interesting design, but is not a large body of water that's evaporating and wasteful and dangerous. There were prior plans. I've begun watching the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation hosted, and there are some fascinating speakers, and I've made it through 2 of them so far. It's 3+ hours of video, but there were plans in the past that had a much better engagement of the CASA with the plaza. So that's something that needs exploration. I should also say that we were not able to go into great depth on a lot of things because there's a lot to be covered. We never took a look at what's going on in the placita, the restrooms. We did not get into the lighting at all. That would have been just way too much to cover. As far as the trees, I think the emphasis on color was misplaced and that they should be more traditional tree varieties. Olives maybe were suggested. That's all I can think of to add right now. So absent Mr. Drury returning for mom duties, I'll turn it back to Brad.
I'm back again, if I may.
Okay.
Piggyback on Mr. House's comments. So yes, I think that's correct. I think a water feature that would be the least possibly wasteful use of water in a feature, whether it's it would be a fountain, I suppose. I would like to pursue the idea of a workshop. I would be all for that. The problem is with the way we have to deal with these meetings is that we cannot see the plans in front of us all at once, and it's really a shame because it makes it very difficult to sort of get our ideas across. As far as trees go, Bob Cunningham, who's been an arborist in the city for quite some time, has posted a number of letters that are available, I think, at least on the HLC website in terms of comments from the public. And he's very, very clear about what he thinks should be in place, and it should be lead toward the native and not get too exotic. I think that's very important too. And one of the things that I don't think was properly vetted in our HLC meeting was the idea of these little art installations that are at ground level, probably set in tile, that either point to like compass rose or where the city hall was and what it looked like. And they don't have to be big, but I think randomly placed amongst the tile of the plaza itself, that was kind of, I think, the idea in the first place. I would be a champion of that. I think that's a great idea, and we could even open it up to competition. That was only sort of a glancing blow in the HLC meeting. As Commissioner House said, it was a lot of stuff to talk about in a very short time. So that's my input. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to both of you. I appreciate that. And we certainly appreciate the dual role that you play in this process. And Mr. Drury, you are exactly right in terms of time constraints, and with presentations, especially when we only have 15 minutes, it was really challenging to figure out what we wanted to cover. A work session could certainly provide an opportunity to have a little bit more back and forth, as well as perhaps share some different views that aren't just a part of a specific submittal. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to Leif to walk us through today's presentation. And I will be probably interjecting periodically. So please take it away, Leif. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back. It seems like we've barely had any sleep since the HLC meeting last week, but we've been working hard to advance the project in the interim. So we just wanted to share some thoughts we've had since then. Let me see. There we go. So as Brad mentioned, we're going to sort of try to take some of these broad topics in sections, and then at the end of each section, maybe have some discussion while it's fresh in everyone's minds. I think that might help facilitate a good conversation. So just to reiterate, this was the previous design. This is what we've this committee sent forth to the HLC, and this is what was presented last week. There was already reference to Commissioner House's friendly critique that it looked like a plaid sock. So we've taken that on board. Really, this notion of just an overall sense of simplification is really what we're trying to move the design towards. We have some ideas. Not all of them are illustrated yet. We just haven't had time, but some of the great Spanish plazas were referenced and frequently have been referenced through this process. This is one that in Salamanca that we're kind of using as a character reference point. I just wanted to particularly look at the ground plane, and that even though it's a lot older than De La Guerra Plaza will be, because it'll be brand new, but that some of the ideas of still having some richness of texture without it being very contrasty and busy looking. So you can see there's actually quite a lot going on, but it's subtle. Some other sort of just character images of ways that larger spaces can be divided for visual interest in more subtle ways. And we're not suggesting big concrete squares. That's not the point of this slide. It's just to show that with very little change in materials or change in directions in the same materials, you can really achieve some rich architectural detailing without it looking like tartan. So this is a sort of an evolution of the plan that we showed to HLC. We've been working at trying to make it much more subtle, and this is not a finished work. So I don't think we're really ready to get into the actual shapes and patterns and everything yet. but we just wanted to show that this is a direction we think we can move in and meet the goal of the simplification. You can kind of see the plaza is basically framed now with this sandstone, like a 5-point sandstone paving that alludes to the El Paseo paving. That was a comment that was well supported. And then the inside, we do think it needs some sort of detailing in the patterns, but the intent would be very, very simple and subtle changes in direction and color. With the water feature, you can see it's much smaller than it was, and we've taken out the sort of the bullseye effect. And we'll talk more about the water feature a little bit later in detail, but I just wanted to point that out. And then the last thing is the notion of randomizing the trees was brought up, and we haven't had time to sort of move trees around and look at other options, but I just wanted to note that we're aware of that and we haven't forgotten it. Just to refresh everyone's memories. There was a little confusion at the HLC about the what we used to call the art nodes. So now it's labeled as a focal point, but the intent there was to have something that's maybe in bronze or cast iron embedded as a medallion in the ground plane. So it would be some point of interest, historical, interpretive, something of that nature. In order to sort of try to start to show you some of the character on the ground, we've taken a few of our model, and these are kind of study shots. So it's just supposed to show the character on the ground. It's not a final watercolor rendering or anything, we realize that, but it does help to get the feeling for what's supposed to be happening under the trees. This would be you can see the current view on the right, and on the left, we have these tree wells that could have some sort of tile decoration and some planting to bring in some landscaping into the space. The arcade, which on a day-to-day basis, provides a place to sit down and people watch. You can kind of start to see in the foreground the sort of the paving. It's all sort of in similar tones, and right down here you can see that those what looked like stripes on the plan originally could simply be the same material running in a different direction, just to give it a little bit more interest. Looking down along what's now the road, really, in front of City Hall. So it's all opened up and very fluid through that space. You can see in the very background that we're still showing a water feature there, but this is to illustrate that it's not a grand gesture. It's more of a subtle thing. So that's kind of where I'll leave it. I don't know, Brad, if you want to facilitate a conversation about this general topic, or maybe Chair Snedden would like to, but I'll leave it up to someone to take it over.
Thank you. I think it's going to take both of us, Mr. Hess and myself, to discuss, lead the discussion on this. And so we're going to just focus first on the simplification. And do you have anything to add, Mr. Hess, before we sort of round table?
Yes, actually I do, Chair Snedden. So one of the things that's always a challenge, which is sort of the potential conflict between the project manager and the architects, is them designing something that we can't afford. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that these are suggestions, these are ideas, these are concepts. It's really about understanding that there's layers, there's patterns, but the patterns may be the same material. But doing potentially 50,000 square feet of sandstone in a 5-point arrangement may not be feasible from a cost perspective. So just understand that there are things that are going to need to evolve and change. So with that caveat, let's hear some thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with Vice Chair Wiscombe. Oh, Mr. Reed. We can start with whoever's camera's on, and then we'll make sure we get to everyone. Commissioner Reed, yes. You're muted.
You are
I
muted.
think we can't. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair Snedden. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So the first question I would have, kind of in the context of the larger potential project on State Street, I'm wondering if what is decided on here at Plaza de la Guerra, assuming that this comes first, will drive the materials on State Street or vice versa. My question is just how do the two interact? If they're dramatically different, is that okay? Do they, how are we considering being intentional and how those two connect at this point?
Commissioner Reed, that's a great question, actually, because currently State Street is brick. So one of the pictures that we showed was of a plaza in Siena, where maybe the brick is not laid flat like it is on State Street, but the upper right picture, for instance, what if it's at an angle with, but it's brick? So that is a transition, just as an idea. But we want a connection point for sure. I think where we probably need to focus our attention right now is probably more in the center of the plaza, and then work on those transitions as they're happening to figure out what that needs to look like, because we'll have multiple connection points. Historic Placita, De la Guerra on both ends.
And Mr. Hess, in terms of this concept for the 5-point sandstone, I guess you're pulling it from what is already present in El Paseo. It seems to me that the El Paseo sandstone, while it's irregular, it's a little bit more squared than this and less jagged than what's being proposed. Has that been considered? It seems like the El Paseo material is much more subtle than what we're seeing in this rendering.
The El Paseo walkway that comes from El Paseo to the plaza, at least the last time I walked it, it was a sort of a sprained ankle waiting to happen, and it's definitely not ADA compliant. So all I was referencing in terms of the 5-point was just that that's an expensive route to go. If it is laid out more like flagstone, but it's flat and it's irregular, certainly all of those are options. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that signing on to a design like that in the early stages is quite expensive. We just need to be aware of it. It doesn't mean we can't do it. It just means that we just need to be very much aware of it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
And if I may, for the simplification of, I think today we won't be deciding on the materials, but if there are comments on the simplifying of the design on this particular one.
Yeah, I think in terms of the simplification, that's all I have for now.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Reed. And Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to understand is the simplification of the design that the Historic Landmarks Commission is talking about. Is it related to the comments about the plaid in the pavement? Is that what we're talking about here? Or is it the features in in the plaza that's too busy, or is it the pavement? If someone could address that, I'm just trying to understand that so we can kind of get to the bottom of the simplification. Commissioner House is there, good.
Hi. Well, first of all, let me say that any kind of rendering doesn't necessarily convey the character of what it will be when it's a finished project. And so the renderings we were looking at before kind of overemphasize the pattern, which is, and they're usually more aerial views. So they're not really representing how you would perceive it at pedestrian height. I think that what they've done is a big step in the right direction. One thing I'm noticing is there are still two focal points. There's the art and there's the water feature. Generally, a design principle is it's easier to resolve a composition with an odd number of focal points, either 1 or 3 or something like that. I remember that the reason that the splash pad couldn't be moved to where the art focal point was because of archaeological artifacts in that area. I would like to know at some point, whether or not something in the very center is a possibility, which would further simplify things, and there would just be one focal point in the middle. So, that's also the kind of simplification we're looking for. To give emphasis to one primary focal point. And it would be interesting to have in the center a fountain with the water jets around it, so it can act as a splash pad, when that's appropriate. But the focus is on the fountain. Could be interesting. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I'm wondering if we should save this simplification for the end of move it to the end of our, get through some of these other elements first, because they may help. Our feedback on the other ones are really more specific. The water feature, the focal points, and the trees, they may actually help guide the simplification of the design. So I'm wondering if we could table this, if the committee agrees to table this one until the end of our discussion and move on to the other ones first. Since Commissioner House is saying that it's not only the pavement, not only the plaid, it's having.
Everything.
There are a lot of
May I make a suggestion that we do a very quick, like, lightning round, since we've already had some discussion on it, just very quickly what we're thinking about simplification, and then we'll come back to it, as you suggest, Vice Chair Wiscombe, on the tying it all together. But I would like to hear just very quickly on thoughts on the simplification direction.
Okay, that's fine with me. My thoughts on it is I like a pavement pattern that's more shown here. We've got some areas that have different pavement, but basically the color is the same, or maybe just a subtle variation in color in some areas. And as Mr. Hess said, maybe we use the more expensive paving in a limited basis for a little richness in the plaza. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Longstreet?
Well, I'll start by saying I watched HLC twice to get a handle on what their comments were. And it felt like there was a lot of misunderstanding about what this design was and where it was in the process. So I am all for simplifying the paving. I think always we have to keep in mind the ADA accessibility, the ability to pull this paving up and deal with what's underneath it, and all of the things that to me weren't really addressed at HLC. We spent 15 months looking at how to use this plaza. So for me, I keep always in mind bringing activity in, what's flexible, what makes it work for so many different activities that we want there. And that was not part of what that discussion. I think the water feature, again, less is more. The jets coming up that we can turn on, turn off, will be there at some point. A fountain, the only fountain I know that we're maintaining right now is at the foot of Stearns Wharf. So I just don't see that as a realistic option maintenance wise. Soap suds in it, all the things that happen. So I like the simplification. I like the pavement, the, less is more. The connection to the CASA can be through change in direction of pavement, like you were saying, and that would look more like a walkway in. So
Okay,
I think you're headed the
And we'll
right
have
way.
time. We'll have time to talk about the water feature in more detail also. Thank you. Councilmember Harmon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was going to make some similar comments to Commissioner Longstreet. I agree. I'm comfortable and agree and appreciate the insight on the paving. That's not my area of expertise. I really appreciate HLC's commentary on form. But my general reaction, if that's sort of what you'd like right now, is we did spend a lot of time talking about function, talking about revitalizing this and making this a space that's used and usable. And so I truthfully, simplification is okay. And I will support that to some extent, but not to the extent that it undermines the function of this space and that it undermines the vitalities that we have really thoughtfully put together. And so I just, I guess I just have to be perfectly frank that I do want to see this space used and usable. And a priority for me is making it functional. And I appreciate commentary on form from our experts and making it fit, but I want this to work also. And I think we've really spent a lot of time doing that. And so for me, I want to see these features. Again, open to simplification, certainly. But my initial reaction is just that let's not forget that we have prioritized function in this space as well. And we see what happens there when we don't have functionality. And a real sort of driver of this process is to revitalize it and make it work better so we don't have what's happening there now. And I don't want to lose sight of that as we move through the process. So that was my initial reaction, and appreciate this conversation. And also, of course, I do want to just say I appreciate HLC's expertise on form, certainly. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And how about if there anybody else wants to comment on this one at this point before we move on so that we can come back to the simplification question. Our next topic is the water feature. So is there anyone else who wants to comment on the simplification? Okay, let's move on to the water feature. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Snedden. Okay, so this was probably the single most talked about item in HLC. And so what we wanted to just maybe take a little more time today to talk about some ways we can still achieve the direction that we heard from the community and one of our design briefs, which was vitality in the plaza, to Councilmember Harmon's point, but address some of the concerns that brought up. So currently we're still showing it in a similar location in the plaza, but it's much smaller. It's almost half the size of the previous iteration. It's still big enough to be functional. There was several comments about could it just disappear visually? And I wanted to show you a slide another project that we worked on some time ago now, but it kind of is along the lines of that train of thought, where it's some jets embedded in paving that you really don't see. All you see is little bronze jet sort of nozzles flush with the grade. That's what those two folks are looking at in the upper center there. So on any given day, they're just sort of don't even get noticed. And then when the temperature reaches a certain point, or whatever the city's operational plan is, they can turn it on, and it's kind of an unexpected little joyful spot in the plaza. So that's kind of just by way of illustration of how we could still achieve a feature like this in almost an invisible way, if that was the direction that was supported. This is more along the lines of what the plan was envisioned to be previously. So you can see that there's two photos on the right, which show some sort of embellished pavement. You know, it's not too overdone, but it's essentially a plaza. You can see that the gentleman just walking across it when it's not turned on, and when it is turned on, it's still fairly discreet. That one has more misting things, but it could be like the photo on the left as well. So that just kind of by way of illustration of how we were imagining it. And I know you've seen these images before, but just by way of illustration. So that's just to set the table for this discussion. We can make it smaller in its same location and more discreet, or we can move it, or we could do any sort of combination of that. But we do really believe that it's a very important ingredient in the success of this space for families and sort of a positive activity. So I'll turn it back over.
And if I may, Leif, I also want to just say that, you know, the size that you're looking at on the bottom right, in the upper right, it's approximately the same size as the compass rose that's actually in Stork Placita. This might be a little bit larger than that. But that's another idea too, is that if you bring that pattern and that idea over to this, make it subtle in terms of the materials, it's sort of a twofer in that sense, and that you'd have a compass as well as the feature.
Thank you, Mr. Heston. I just, as we open this discussion on the water feature, there are a few things that I want to say. Having watched the HLC meeting, I think it was maybe not completely understood what the feature would be. It's really what we're proposing, or what we sent forward, was an at-grade fountain that could be on or off, and when it's off is completely level with the rest of the plaza, so not to interfere with other activities within the plaza. I will say for myself as a council member that I don't intend to approve a traditional fountain in the plaza or really in the city, from my perspective with climate change and continuing drought. And I think a water feature is nice. It brings an element of movement and cooling, and a standing fountain invites possibly bathing or other activities in standing water. It's not as safe, and this is a feature that it can be on or it can be off, and it could be off for a whole season or for ever long as needed. So I just wanted to put forward some of my thoughts on that. I think I really appreciate the elevation views that you showed today, in that it shows that the fountain, that it's not going up very high. It's just a little bit of water that kind of cools the plaza. Having said that, I think we need to open it up and really take into account HLC's comments, but I'll start by saying that a traditional fountain is not something that I personally would support. But if toning it down or making it less focal, or more like a compass rose, I think is a really nice idea. And other comments on that, please, Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chair Snedden. I think there's been a number of comments referencing these beautiful historic European plazas that are very simple, that may have no fountain, no water feature, very few features. I think, from my perspective, a major distinguisher between what we have here and what they have there is those European plazas are typically almost always activated on all four sides by businesses, food and beverage, cafes. We are limited in this plaza in that two of the four sides won't have that outside of special events. We can't count on, a change of use at the news press. And we don't even know how the existing restaurants on the west side of the plaza would even interact. So I think having some feature, some amenity, unlike traditional European plazas, is important to bring people in. I fear it just wouldn't be a draw otherwise. And I agree that, the difference, while a traditional fountain is beautiful, it's more of a static feature. And I think having an interactive feature, be it a water feature, is really important. And I referencing this bottom right picture, I think my memory serves me correctly. There's a splash pad in Fashion Island in Newport Beach. And they're little droplets of water that come up. I think there were a number of concerns about kids just getting soaking wet and terrorizing the area and local businesses. And I think that can be mitigated significantly. So if it's not a splash pad, there has to be some feature to draw people in, because I just don't see us counting on the same level of activation that you see in traditional plazas worldwide because of some of the limiting factors here. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Thank you. And Councilmember Harmon, and then Vice Chair Wiscombe. You're muted.
Sorry, it's Friday. Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with both of you. I mean, this splash pad, water feature, whatever we want to call it, has been the element of this that has most excited me since the very beginning. I really cannot say enough how important I think it is to this space that we get something in here, as Commissioner Reed said, to activate it and to specifically bring families downtown and engage them in this space. So I agree with you, Madam Chair, about the fountain issue. I don't personally see myself moving in that direction either, for all the reasons that you listed. I also want to say I'm not a fan of the smaller splash pad. I appreciate the compromise, and I guess if that's where we end up, it's better than nothing. But I think this can be made to work beautifully, whether we make it in the Compass Rose design or we change the look of it so it's a little bit more subtle. I think you're right, Madam Chair, that there was some misunderstanding of what this is. I got that sense as well. So my hope is when folks understand it a little better and know that it's not on 100% of the time with water jets shooting up, 20 feet, there'll be a little bit more comfort with it. But I just want to put it out there with respect. I am still 100% behind this. And I also just want to share with all of you, with my fellow committee members and folks that are watching, I've actually gotten a huge amount of feedback on this feature in particular. It's rare for me that a lot of folks engage with some of these sort of more bureaucratic processes at the city. And I've been really surprised with the number of community members who have contacted me related to this specifically. So that's, it's all anecdotal. So who knows? I'm sure there's as many people who don't like it, but I did want to just say that I've seen and heard from people who aren't traditionally engaged in these processes on this point in particular. And I really want to see it as part of this design. I feel very strongly about it. And whatever we can do to sort of make it more subtle while keeping the effectiveness of what it's supposed to do, to draw families in and to have the cooling effect, like you said, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'll stop. Those are my 2 cents, but still really behind them. Thanks.
Thank you. And that is what we're looking for is sort of a determination on how strongly you feel about this feature and how much we want to work towards if it's something we're really backing or not. Chair Wiscombe, Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Are you elevating me now to chair?
Well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I fully support the comments made by all of you so far. This is a revitalization of the plaza, and I think to take it in too traditional a pattern with a traditional fountain is just not the right vibe. I think, unfortunately, the terminology that was used, splash pad, probably created some angst, not only amongst the commission members on HLC, but also some members of the public that, felt this wasn't right. But this is, first of all, it will be a recirculating thing. We're not wasting a lot of water. We're not letting the water evaporate on the ground. It will go back in and get cleansed and come back up. And I just think if you go back to the very beginning of when this public process started, and we had the workshop pre-COVID that Suzanne Elledge ran, and all the public comment, we want this plaza to be activated. We want to draw people in, and there are ways to do that, and this is absolutely one of them, and it won't be on all the time, so I would just call it an interactive water feature, and sometimes it's on and sometimes it's not. But when it's on, you can interact with it, and I think that's very, very important. So those are my comments. Thank you.
And thank you. And Commissioner Perry.
Good morning, all. I want to commend the HLC for prompting us to go back and rethink a lot of what's been presented to us so far. I look at the plaza a little bit differently, I think, than most, because the word revitalization keeps coming up. The plaza's never had a whole lot of life to it without an event there. And if we really want to look at bringing some life and vitality to it, have we had any conversations with the building owners on the west side and how they might want to extend their operations a little bit further out? They're all been sectioned off. It might offer a different slant or view to this. I also really don't want us to lose perspective of the Casa de la Guerra and what the ground is that we're working with. This is where the birthplace of Santa Barbara, Pueblo Santa Barbara, began. 1870s or I'm going to let Ann fill in historically for me. This was the birth of our Pueblo, and I'd like to see us preserve some of that. And I don't see a splash pad that we may compare to a fashion island really fitting in this environment. It's a business environment, not a play environment. And it's not really, it has not been a destination for most people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Peterson.
Thank you. I keep going back to the simplification discussion, and I think seeing these new images of what a splash pad or a water feature could be really helped me with that. And also Commissioner House's comment about simplifying to maybe one central feature. And that made me wonder, could there be a merging of that central public art feature and the water feature that maybe did both things in the middle of the plaza? I keep hearing compass roads, but it sounds like we have one very nearby in historic Placida. I wonder if the design for a very flat water feature that could be turned on or turned off could have some kind of historical reference or kind of capture the history of the area through a public art piece, and also be a water feature that could be activated, so that there's one central attraction or draw to the center of the plaza. That I think could also help with HLC's comments about the public art nodes and why were they sort of so symmetrical and sort of sprinkled around, and you know, what was that trying to do? I wonder if we could just consolidate some of these ideas. And I think that you're right. The word splash pad, someone said, is a trigger, and we are also creating an area where kids play and an area where people gaze at art. And maybe we can break that down a little bit and sort of think about it as a central feature that kind of captures the essence of the plaza.
Thank you. And we can come back to the simplification at the end, but as a question to you, do you feel committed to a water feature in some form, or is it something that is you're not as attached to, or where do you stand on the water feature at all? Yeah.
You know, just talking about needing a water feature doesn't really engage me as much. I think when we talk about it as a way that enhances or merges together with other attributes of the plaza, then I can get more interested in it. But I'm convinced by the arguments against fountains, or, you know, I think one of the HLC commissioners also mentioned a splash pad that looks like something in Las Vegas. I don't want to see that either. But I think there's a way I think there's a way that it can activate the plaza and also be subtle and beautiful and enhance some of the other features.
Thank you. And Commissioner Longstreet.
I think we all know how I feel about the splash pad water feature. And to Roger's comments, that this is the birthplace of Santa Barbara, and I understand that. And I want our families to feel welcome in it. I want to invite people down. I want people to feel like they can go to Casa de la Guerra. How many of our families have even been inside? That's what makes a city come alive. That's what brings us downtown. I think that having activity there, having young families in, you know, our downtown's dead right now. And we don't want to be in a dead museum. We want to be in a living museum. We want people there. The splash pad idea, I think that says play and equipment, and that's what I got out of HLC. We're talking about something you walk through. I think of Nice. I think of sitting on the edges of the Plaza in Nice and watching families walk through on their way to somewhere else, the kids having a little play, and off they go. You know, just I'm really pretty committed to this, I would say. Simplification is excellent. And I think we have to try some things to make our downtown a place for everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Longstreet. And we have not heard on this point from Commissioner Drury or Commissioner Howes.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Drury.
Yes. Well, I'm increasingly ambivalent. The ambivalence stems from the idea of vitality precluding tranquility. And there was one a mock-up early on today that showed both sides of the length of the plaza vitalized with those planters, those tile planters with people sitting in the shade and chairs and eating or not eating and enjoying just being tranquil. I think that has a lot to do with what we should be aiming for. It's fine to have the idea of an active end to through the plaza with the splash pad was a terrible term. It got everybody really excited in both the wrong and the right ways. And I think that needs to be put to rest. A water feature sounds a lot less acrimonious, I guess, or anyway. So my idea is that if you have downtown, and we trust that the plaza will not be the reason to revitalize downtown, but it will be an offshoot of it. I think the idea is, and I've always thought this since this advisory committee started, that we have a place where people can go with their children after shopping or eating downtown and just sit in the shade and enjoy the tranquility of looking at the mountains, looking up at Casa de la Guerra, across the plaza to the city hall, which is a lovely building. And I think we need to go very easy on the water feature idea. I'm still ambivalent about it. I think I'm with Chair Sneddon's idea of not having a fountain in the middle. I think the idea of looking from the Casa de la Guerra side of the plaza down to the News Press building, which is a lovely building in itself, I think that should be uninterrupted. And a splash, here I'm using that term again, the water feature, as proposed, would not be a visual obstruction to that view. It's a sense of space. I think that is really critical. So as you can probably tell, I'm ambivalent about the water feature, but I'm not even going to say which way I'm going to lean. I'll leave that as a surprise for next time.
Okay. Just try to surprise us before it gets to HLC.
I just want to keep Mr. Hess in the dark for another week.
Okay.
No, I really am.
That's what we're here for, to discuss it. Yes. Okay.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Commissioner Drury. Yes. Commissioner Howe.
Well, I would largely agree with Commissioner Drury's eloquent commentary. I'm feeling like I'm walking a fine line between expressing my own opinions and those being taken as representing HLC's position. So I think the bottom line is, I think that a joint meeting of HLC and this committee is the perfect and the only solution. Otherwise, we just keep ping-ponging back and forth and not really understanding each other and looking for a solution that makes everybody happy. So I think we need to make that happen.
Excellent. On that, Commissioner Reed, yes.
Yeah, just one follow-up question, Chair. So I really liked Dr. Peterson's idea of potentially combining the art with the water and moving that potentially to the center. And I know that the limitation of moving the water feature to where the art feature is now, there was a conflict because of the archaeological resources. If the water feature was moved to the center and it was potentially combined with the art, would there still be an archaeological conflict there potentially?
Mr. Hess?
Commissioner Reed, the further we go toward Casa de la Guerra, the more resources that we will find. The majority of those resources were found basically where that as we noted, the focal point is, or the art feature focal point is. We did not dig in the center, but if I could just opine a little bit on art versus activity. I've had a few discussions, I should say, with both the Chumash as well as Santa Barbara County Arts. And there is an enormous interest in this space for representation and for art and to tell stories and to have symbols. And I feel like the combination could be amazing, and or we may have such a desire to have an art expression that we may want a separate space for that. So I want to make sure that we have the art discussion as well, to be able to try and balance that out, because there really is an enormous interest in this, and there's a lot of cultural representation that needs to take place. But I think it's also a great idea. So I'll say stop there.
And I would also just add to, I think Commissioner Longstreet mentioned the soap suds and the fountain. I think that could just be an absolute nightmare. I recently installed a fountain downtown, and it's the target of mischief on a weekly basis. It's just brutal. And I think, you know, with prolonged periods of drought, I don't know how it becomes so much less impactful when there isn't water in it. So I would, if we're going to do a water feature at all, I would definitely strongly support something at grade.
Thank you. And I think since this is shaping up that we're going to be supporting a work session with HLC, I think this is really helpful for Mr. Hess to be able to then go through the rest of sort of the proposed responses to the HLC comments, and then we can give our views with in mind that we're not solving it today, but that we will hopefully be supportive of having a work session with HLC to really resolve some of these issues. I think this is shaping up very nicely. Thank you, Mr. Hess. And continue.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Drury.
This is Michael Drury. If I may, yeah, I think that it's also important to remember that that was the first concept review that Mr. Hess presented, and we take this very seriously. This is will be a banner project for the city, and whatever it takes in terms of concept reviews, it'll take. And I really welcome the idea of a workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Leaf, I think we're ready to move on from this discussion item to the next.
All right, thank you. This seems it could be partially moot because the conversation has wandered across topics so far. So the next item we wanted to bring up was the idea of these focal points. Commissioner Howes did a great job of articulating the benefits of odd numbers, and I would agree with that. Just to kind of sort of set the table for this discussion, I think the question is, I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts about this notion of combining elements into one. The idea of centering a focal point and consolidating it into one is intriguing. I'll just share with you a little bit of our rationale for having the water feature at the southern end. And that was, if it's a lively, active hub on any given sort of Saturday morning, for instance, it doesn't dominate the entire plaza when it's being used. It's able to be sort of segmented out. So you move it into the middle, and that may be a very popular feature, and certainly from a revitalization perspective, but it might have a tendency to take over more of the plaza for that single use. So it does allow us to sort of have an active area within the plaza, and it's deliberately at the back so that people are coming through. But, you know, if I am interested in hearing everyone's thoughts on this, because there are different ways to approach this. So maybe I'll leave it at that. Everyone's already touched on it in their comments already. So, you know, maybe this will be a brief conversation.
Well, and if I could just quickly tag on to this, again, we haven't had the art discussion in full because quite frankly, we're not prepared for it. But I also, I want to throw another idea out there. And again, it's just an idea, but perhaps many of you are familiar with Alcatraz and the walking tour that they have there, where you basically listen to someone telling you all about what happened there. I can envision something where you've got a QR code at each of the pedestrian entrances where you can use that to tap into a recording that basically gives you a walking tour of the plaza. That helps educate you on not only the architecture, but perhaps the art, the focal points, the different things that are representative of all the cultures that are a part of Santa Barbara, but also perhaps that goes over to Casa, perhaps it goes up into El Paseo. Schools could come down and do a walking tour. People that are coming in from town can learn about Santa Barbara through this walking tour. And if you had something in this art feature, the focal point on the left, that maybe was a multicultural piece of work, then it just starts to tell a different story and bring the different history components into that space in a way that's educational, active, and representative. So it's just an idea, but I want to make sure that, as Leaf said, that if we have those combined, I don't think it works to have that multicultural piece, only because when it's got water on it, people aren't going to be able to see it unless they're willing to get wet. But I think that's, again, just an idea, but I think there's so much ability within this to leverage technology to make this really exciting in a different way. So with that, please, we'd love to hear your thoughts on these focal points.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. So this is a wide open topic, since we haven't, thank you for reminding us of that we haven't really tackled the art discussion. So maybe we're looking at this a little bit tied into the simplification and the fountain. It is all starting to come together, the discussion that they're interrelated, obviously. So thoughts on that? I actually really like the walking tour idea, and to what you just said there about having, if all of the art feature is melded together, then we risk not really honoring individual cultural inputs and focal points. So I think let's keep that conversation going. Is there anybody, we can start with Vice Chair Wiscombe if she's ready, or Commissioner Longstreet, yes.
I thought what helped was the view, the other views you used, where everything was simplified from the ground level, what we see walking. Because from the top, it looks busy. It looks like we have things sticking up and, a lot happening. When they're in the ground, I think of, and Commissioner Drury and I served on the committee that put in the mosaics down at the waterfront and that process. And that's what I think can work. If you're looking at a bird's eye view of it, it would look awfully busy. But when you're on ground level, and it isn't, it's just something to look at, something to learn from, a good way to represent what's happening. So I think it's hard to have this discussion and really nail it down when we don't have, we haven't had that part. I think it's a whole separate almost committee of the people that will put it together. But I'm all for having things in the pavement that just add interest.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Commissioner Longstreet's comments and your comments, Madam Chair. I think that centralizing something that is going to be multicultural and celebrate a lot of different cultures in our community it probably will get lost. I think Mr. Hess described these as, or Leaf did as perhaps bronze medallions in the ground. And I think it's something at grade that provides an opportunity for educating our community and educating tourists about Santa Barbara and its cultures is a superb idea. And I think actually it's a very exciting idea. So I'm very much in support of having some sort of at-grade variation that really celebrates our cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to clarify, are we talking both about the nodes and about a central feature? Mr. Hess, is that what you need feedback for at this point? Okay. And was there anything further on that, Vice Chair Wiscombe, on this focal point
Well,
in the
I was
center?
referring to the nodes, but I think they got renamed, didn't they? To
Yes, those.
those are the nodes, but we called them something else this morning.
So we're trying to differentiate, and maybe the art feature is the larger space, and the focal points are the smaller spaces that complement, supplement to the art feature.
So the focal points, my understanding was we're talking now about the focal points and the potential for an educational walking tour that involves those focal points that educates people about our multicultural heritage, et cetera. Is that correct? That's what
Yes,
I was
sorry. Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That, I
Yes.
was commenting on the focal points, not the central art feature. I don't, we've seen some ideas of that at our committee meetings, but I don't think we've ever really had a serious discussion about that. And if we keep that central art feature, maybe that's HLC's, go take the ball and run with it. And, I think that might be something that they are going to want to tackle. So thank you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And I think to add to Mr. Hess's comments and yours also as well, Vice Chair Wiscombe, that with the QR code and a walking tour, not just community members and tourists, but also schools, I think we could have really robust field trips there that would be of interest in tying into the CASA and to the general downtown history as well, which would then also reactivate the plaza in a way with education. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, Chair Sneddon, I to the comments on the water feature being moved to the center, and how that may conflict with activity. I think the benefit of that at-grade feature is that it can be turned off at any point in time, and that can kind of control that dynamic. I really do, and I hadn't thought about it until it was brought up today, but I like the idea of considering these major features in odd numbers and odd pairings. And I don't know if it would be too dominant, but if you were to do a very subtle water feature in the center of the plaza and consider two art features that flank that on either side, it could be interesting. And then just thinking about some of I think there were HLC comments on breaking up the linear aspects of the plaza. That was maybe more in relation to the trees, and some of the geometric aspects, and randomizing it a little bit. And maybe there could be a consideration of rethinking the art nodes in a more randomized fashion. It can make it a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more of a discovery. And I also wanted to just come back to, I know we had talked about initially like children's footsteps, and some other ideas. If any of those kind of creative accessory art pieces could still work here. I thought that was really exciting. And if the water feature, the I don't want to use the taboo word splash pad anymore, but if that, that being oriented towards children is significantly minimized, how can we incorporate something else that that really caters to youth and children and families? And I just loved those footsteps. I know that has cultural considerations, but would love to hear more about that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Drury.
this is going to be my last blast before I have to do the vaccination shuffle.
Then please give us all your comments, even if we haven't gotten to the topic yet, so that we can have the benefit of those. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, so the idea, if a water feature is in place, I would prefer it to be where it's located in the original plans, down at the bottom in front of the News Press building, not in the center. I'd like to see less activity in the center so that people can activate it themselves by just sitting there. And that would be my preference. And I think that the water feature and the art feature should be combined right there and then go out from there. For instance, you could have an art feature just to the left of it as you look towards City Hall, where the Abadie Adobe used to be, and pictures of that and what the history of that family is. And then for any place you have that you could put something that is with an explanation historically, and Mr. Hess's idea of headphones and that I think is absolutely excellent. And I think that there is an opportunity, I don't know, it's not fleshed out in my mind yet, but there's an opportunity for somewhat of an art competition, like B.B. Longstreet and I took part in down at the breakwater, down at the harbor. And I think all that stuff it would activate the plaza from bird's eye view, but you wouldn't see it until you walk to it in real time. So I'm all for an art injection and a ground level interesting display of our cultural history. Thank you. And I'll say goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good luck, Mr. Drury. Yes. Bye.
Goodbye, commissioners, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner House.
Well, there have been a lot of great comments and great ideas, and it's been a very stimulating conversation, so I very much appreciate that. I agree with Mr. Hess that combining some kind of tribute to multicultural heritage with a water feature might not work out so well, which underlies the reality that deciding on art features is always difficult. And I think there's going to be as many different opinions as people that weigh in on it. But I do like the idea of leaving perhaps a central feature to the HLC to determine and the art to be separate from that, so that it kind of simplifies the process of making those decisions. And I think also crucial is to find out through a consultation with the archaeologists that have been on board so far, whether or not it's even a possibility to locate something like the water jet feature in the center of the plaza as opposed to where it's currently located. Because if it's just not possible because of archaeological remnants, then we can rule that out and move forward. Otherwise, we keep tossing these different ideas back and forth and we don't know even whether or not they're feasible. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have not heard from Councilmember Harmon and Dr. Peterson. Yes.
Thanks. I found that the comments about, I think from Mr. Hess, that the public arts community is and the Chumash are very interested in participating and adding multiple voices and stories to the potential art that could be in the plaza. That's really exciting. And it's not for me to comment on what public art could be, but it has stuck in my mind that these art nodes, I think they're responding to kind of the classical design of the plaza, but we also could get a sense of redundancy, I think. You know, every public art piece has this same size, has to fit within a circle, must be bronze and, you know, engraved. And that's not really the way that the stories of our city have evolved over time. Things pop up and they disappear and they show up in different locations. And I would like to see something that's more organic and reflects that. Not that we would have sort of public art sort of wallpapered all around the plaza, but could there be more kind of organic manifestations of art that reflected different stories in different places? And I think that would help get at Commissioner Reed's comments about, he mentioned exploration, and those are some of the words I was thinking about in terms of what makes an interesting tour or just an experience walking around a public space, is that the kind of sense of wonder and discovery and, you know, surprise that we may not completely get with the art nodes. So those were my comments there.
Thank you. And Councilmember Harmon, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I so appreciate Dr. Peterson's comments. That was, she so well articulated this sort of, I guess, sense that I was feeling that when it comes to the art nodes or whatever we call it, I don't want to circumscribe creativity and storytelling too tightly. And I know sometimes that's in conflict with some of the folks who we've tasked with giving us feedback on design. But that said, I think we would really benefit by recognizing, as Dr. Peterson said, that our stories and our city's stories have been told in different ways. And that's just sort of what I was feeling as a layman looking at this, or layperson rather, looking at this design. I would hope and would love to see us bring in creativity and exploration and discovery. All of those words that she used just so exactly pointed to what I was feeling and my reaction. And then the last thing I'll add, Chair Snedden, I think it was you who made the point that if we combine the water feature with the art, we may be at risk of limiting the opportunity to tell stories. And that was a concern of mine as well. And I do want to make sure that we have space to lift up the stories of our Chumash neighbors and really prioritize that as well. So that would be my concern with combining everything into one. We would really be limiting ourselves. And so, yeah, just maybe emphasize the discovery aspect and thank you, appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I will add to that. I think we're waiting for a few more comments here, but until someone else comes on, I will add to that I find a sense of relief when I see now these umbrellas that are added in, and I think it's because it adds that more organic, randomized pattern a little bit. And there in the discussion when we get to of simplification, and we still haven't talked about the trees, but I think a little more fluidity and a little bit more of that exploration or organic shaping. I think we heard that from HLC, and I think it's something that's been reflected throughout in this committee as well, from the beginning throughout the sort of discussion of that. So keeping that open. It occurs to me, and this is just a thought as we're in this meeting, that the focal points are sort of linear, and those could be maybe as a timeline because those are more linear. Or we've talked about randomizing them also. And then the central art feature could be honoring, you know, the pre-linear time of the plaza, and that could be our Chumash or a point of the land itself, and that we are, you know, inhabiting on top of that land. And the linear feature could be more the historic from the time of the plaza starting. Just an idea, something in there that those, we don't need to be at each one of those points honoring all the individual histories, but that we could have one feature that's one type of history, and then the central point another. And just as an idea. On the fountain, the water feature, I do like it off to the side rather than in the center. For all the reasons, if we're talking about a passive plaza, then there are areas where you can be away from that if that's too much activity. or toward that if that's the activity that you're seeking in the plaza. So I do like it sort of on one side or the other. And I think we talked about why it needed to be towards this side than the other. I'm not sure we've heard from everyone on the focal points. Commissioner Perry, Commissioner Longstreet, if you wanted to mention on these, or we do still need to discuss the trees, and maybe we do that and then do just the overall comments. Okay, there we are, Commissioner Perry.
Just so we can move on, I have no comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. And okay, then let's get to our final point here, and then we can have it all concluding discussion. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Leaf, let's move on to, I believe it's trees.
Yes, that's right. I'll just go back to this plan briefly by way of introduction. So the topic of the trees, there's kind of two suggestions and ideas that have come up. One is the species selection, and the second is the placement and the location of them within the plaza. So I just popped back to this view for a minute just to show the overall plan for the trees as currently proposed is quite linear, which is one of the things we'd like to hear from you today on. You see on the western edge there, it's a line of trees, fairly orderly, and then on the other side, the City Hall side, it's starting to form a line, even though it's interrupted with things. So, and that was really done deliberately with a sort of a mindset of these historic plazas that are quite orderly and geometric and structured. So that was kind of where that came from, and to keep the middle flexible. The other question was was not a new suggestion, by the way, that the idea of perhaps introducing a little more diversity into the tree palette. Up to now, we've really tried to exercise a lot of restraints so that it wasn't, in our mind, too busy, and it had some sort of simplicity to it with only a few species. However, it's come up enough times that we wanted to open this up again. The HLC, there were several suggestions about more historic or traditional plantings. Commissioner Drury mentioned some correspondence that he's received from other arborists, which we've taken on board. Brad's met with Nathan Slack several times, the city arborist. So in light of all that, we're proposing to perhaps introduce a third species. We're showing the olive now on the screen. And then the other concern was the floss silk tree, you remember, was quite the dramatic pink flowering species that we were using as an accent. Concerns were brought up about its invasive root tendencies. So this is a potential substitute for that meets similar criteria in terms of the planting design. Other suggestions, oaks and sycamores were brought up. We're reluctant to introduce oaks just because they're very dense and would potentially not do very well in terms of showing off the architecture, and also they're very, very messy. Lots of litter from oak trees, so perhaps not great for a plaza. Sycamores, huge trees. They also drop a fair amount of leaf litter as well. So we kind of ruled out oaks and sycamores in our own design team, but interested to hear what people have to say. So I'll leave it at that and maybe open it up, talk about the species and the location within the plaza.
Thank you. I'll start just very simply. I love the trumpet. I love the pink and the splash of color. I don't think we need to have as many of them. Love the olive, and that's, I'm assuming, the non-fruiting olive. And then I'm not as attached to the Palo Verde, but I'm not opposed to it. And just really, I would like to see a more organic layout of the trees. I think that's part of what makes the plaza interesting is you have this, random palm tree in the center and the pepper, and I prefer it not being so linear myself, but that's for discussion. But I just wanted to those are my simple comments on the trees. Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important, and it didn't come out at HLC because they didn't see any elevations, but I think it's important for everyone to know, I don't think there's any at-grade trees. These are all in raised planters. Is that correct?
That's correct,
Yes.
Chair Wiscombe.
Yes.
Or Vice
Okay.
Chair Wiscombe.
Yeah, so when you're talking about what it looks like in the plaza, you're talking about, and we've seen elevations of these raised planters. There was, suggestions that maybe they be colorful mosaics or something. I think that's important for the discussion of perhaps making the pattern more random, et cetera. I agree with the comments that Leaf made about oaks and sycamores. I think the addition of this olive tree is nice. I would like to see, as Chair Sneddon said, perhaps a little bit of the breaking up of the linear, if we can achieve that with these raised planters. And I also think using the 3 tree species, maybe the silk floss tree or floss silk tree, very sparingly because of its root structure, but also just making the species more random, I think will really help the design, and also perhaps do something with the layout on the west side of the plaza where you've got the line of trees, and make that more random. I think that would really improve it, and I'm in favor of using all 3 of these, and not actually replacing the pink trumpet unless our consultants feel that that's just not a good choice down the road for this plaza. But I'd like to see a little more variety and a little bit less linear approach to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hess, yes, and then
If I may
Commissioner
just,
Long.
thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify one thing, Nathan Slack, the city's urban forester or forestry manager, he was really concerned about using the floss silk tree because of not only the size, but then the root structure. It just doesn't, it's not going to end well, even with a 10-foot wide diameter tree well. He just felt like it would just not, long-term would not be good. The proposal of the pink trumpet tree is approximately the same size as the other 2 that we're looking at long-term, in the 20 to 25 foot range. So it would be consistent in terms of height. The floss silk can get giant. So I just wanted to clarify that.
And I'm sorry, I misspoke. I meant the pink trumpet tree. So the 3 species. I got confused about that. But yeah, I like the pink trumpet tree. I think that's a good replacement. So I'm very comfortable, but I'd like to see a little more variety in the trees. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Longstreet.
What I'm remembering also from our discussion was that these trees are colorful at different times of the year. So it isn't like we're creating a pink and yellow palette all year long. So I liked the idea of having these pops of color at different times. My one concern about the olive is the ones that we have on our property are so slow growing. So we need to kind of mix it up that we don't end up with these, without any shade for quite a long time. So how we mix them will be important for achieving a shade and a visual impact.
Thank you. Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, I love the idea of the olive trees. And if we're not, I guess this isn't a budget conversation, but if it worked within the budget to move forward with mature specimen olive trees, I just think there's such randomness in that variety. It brings in those kind of architectural, structural elements. There's nothing more beautiful, in my opinion, than the right selection in olive trees. I appreciated in watching the HLC meeting some of the comments around that. I think it just in and of itself breaks up kind of the linear aspects, and even if it was considered to go all olive trees, of course, with the trees that are existing in the plaza now, you lose some of that pop of color, but I think that can be made up for in the planter boxes and maybe splashes of color and some of the at-grade art features. I really love the idea of committing to primarily olive trees. And I thought, it would be a big loss to lose the colorful elements of what had previously been proposed, but I see a lot of benefit in going with olive. And to Commissioner Longstreet's concern about maturity, I know we can get those that are quite substantial. So that I would support a direction like that.
Thank you. And Commissioner House, and then Councilmember Harmon.
Well, I would just say I really love Commissioner Reed's comments. So I would agree with that. And, I could see predominantly olives with just an accent of the other two trees. So it's just kind of a surprise over the year that, oh, look at that burst of color, instead of all blooming trees. I like the surprise element. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you. Let me see if I can. All right, I can't get my video to unpause, but that's okay. I also love olive trees, but I really, really like the color and the idea of them blooming in different seasons. I just, to me, what I think that brings, as opposed to color and maybe the permanent features, this allows for just a new discovery over the course of a single year. If it looks sort of different, because if you go in fall, the trumpet tree, I don't know if they bloom in fall. Vice Chair Wiscombe could probably tell us that. But I love the idea of having this space evolve through the seasons. And it really gives it, to me, just a sense of life and livelihood that I really love. So I do love olive trees. I think we all love olive trees. I would love to see some of them there, but I like the idea of seasonal colors. I think that brings something different and something we don't have in a lot of places. So my 2 cents. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And before we go to Dr. Peterson, can we have the question answered about when the pink trumpet tree is in bloom? Or does it always have leaves and then sometimes it's pink? We can work on
hoping
that.
that week comes on. I've actually just asked that question to be.
Okay.
I can.
We're going to look it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll look it up offline here and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And then Dr. Peterson, yes.
I wanted to add my support for the olive trees. It's a really nice tie-in with Casa de la Guerra. We have 2 very old olive trees on that property, and that was one of the comments from HLC, is to increase that connectivity with Casa de la Guerra. It also turns the trees and the landscaping into a nice interpretive feature. I think we have an opportunity here to choose things that are sort of iconic to our community and things that set us apart from other communities. And the history and use of olives and olive oil in Santa Barbara goes back to the late 18th, early 19th century, and it's still, as we know, the growing of olive trees and the creation of olive oil is still a very popular industry within our county today. It's reflective of our climate and some of the Mediterranean heritage of the people who settled the community. So I would like to see that incorporated. And after considering that, I'm less interested in sort of the flowering trees for their beauty alone, because the olives are beautiful in their own way. I think Commissioner Reed made that argument well with kind of the intricacy of the twining trunks and also the beautiful silver foliage. And I know we can get, I think, non-fruiting or non-messy varieties of them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we heard from Drury. Oh, Commissioner Perry, if you have anything to add there too, feel free to pop on. Yes.
Losing powers on hand holding my tablet. Love the addition of the olive tree. I think it's a wonderful tie into the Casa de la Guerra. And then as far as the layout for the landscaping of the plaza, one, leave it to the experts, but as they thought, I think clusters of these trees would be an ideal way to make a statement of 3 olive trees in a little grouping, your pink trumpet trees, the Palo Verde, and then having seating areas around them. So they make a real strong statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to highlight what excellent input. This is exactly what happens in the positive part of the process of going to HLC and receiving this type of feedback. And we hadn't looked at the olive tree or considered it in this way, and it seems to have strong support on this committee. So I think this is exactly the kind of input and response that we hope to see and that working together brings about. So really thank you for those comments. And were the trees the last individual topic? And then maybe we want to do a round of final sort of comments, or Mr. Hess, how do you advise that we proceed?
We have, Madam Chair, it's about 10:18 right now. So in the interest of time, we've got about 12 minutes. I think we want to come back to anyone who has comments on the simplicity idea in regard to now further reflection on the other topics. And then I don't think we're going to have time to broach the topic of the landscaping in front of City Hall. So I think we'd be comfortable with just concluding with people's final remarks on the simplicity of the design.
Okay, let's do that. And then as people do that, if I believe we have support for a working session with HLC, I think that would be really beneficial all the way around. So we could just discuss these topics. So if anybody has specific opinions on that, feel free to add those to your general comments about the simplicity. So in these comments, as we go around, just any final thoughts on that, and then back to the simplicity, really final thoughts there as well. And Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I totally support the joint meeting. I think that's just a great approach, and I thank Commissioner Longstreet for bringing that up and proposing that idea. In terms of simplicity, I think that we are not quite at a point when we can comment on that because for instance, HLC has not seen any elevations. We need to be able to experience this plaza through, we saw some today, but we need to be able to experience this plaza the way people are going to experience it walking through it. And I think that's really going to go a long way to helping refine the design and deal with some of the some of the comments that HLC had about the plan view design that they're seeing now that looks too busy. So I would appreciate maybe coming to the joint meeting with really, seeing what these planters are going to look like, and they have seating around them, having let the Landmarks Commission have the benefit of seeing the whole commission, seeing some of the things that we've seen, and the lighting, and the being able to walk around the plaza in the daytime and at night, and what's proposed. And I think that would really be more helpful than having a plan view discussion of the simplicity of the design. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll just, if anybody doesn't pop up, we'll just go in order. Councilmember Harmon? Or Commissioner Longstreet? Yes.
I agree with Commissioner Wiscombe. Right now, when I look at it and I see the curves, that are in the pavement, can I tell if they're curves in the pavement or are they walls? And so that's what I think confuses the eye with this view of them. I want us to be careful with the randomness of the trees, that we don't inhibit the use of the space, that we make sure that we're still able to have the large fence there, that our tree planters aren't precluding having a booth there when we need it. So just that we keep in mind the functional use of the space for the events that traditionally have been there. I agree that we need that person on the ground view of it. And I would think that we would need at least one more meeting before we had a joint meeting with HLC.
Okay.
Those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that feedback. Very quickly, before we go to Commissioner Perry, do we have public comment?
Yes, we do. We have 3 people that have raised their hands.
Okay, so with everyone's permission, we'll go through these and then we'll receive public comment so that we can finish out this meeting rather than continuing. Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Perry.
I think it's been very productive today, so thank you to everybody. Would love to see some type of an outreach to the building owners and to the existing businesses on the West Plaza to see what will be beneficial to them, so we don't eliminate the element of a Plaza Cafe or an extension of those existing businesses that will help stimulate interest to the plaza. That's my comment.
Mm-hmm.
Good days.
Yes, thank you. And then Commissioner Howes?
Here I am.
You are.
I personally think that the next step should be the joint meeting with the HLC. I'm not so sure there's a lot more to be gained by having another committee meeting to discuss more elements of this. I think we need to merge minds with HLC and start to come to some sort of consensus on things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Dr. Peterson.
Just a couple of final comments about the continuity and connection with Casa de la Guerra. And this did come up at HLC. And we do have a low wall currently in front of the Casa. And I think I'd mentioned early on in this process that the trust would be interested in having conversations about the benefits of removing that wall now that there is no street and public sidewalk there to improve that connectivity. I really liked at the beginning of the meeting a comment from Commissioner Longstreet about a way of changing the design or the coloring motifs or materials so that it appeared that the plaza was sort of opening up into the Casa courtyard with, I think she said, a visual walkway into the Casa. And I like that idea very much. You know, the Casa has a decomposed granite surface. It is, so I do want to make the point that it is a a building from a different time period. It's much earlier than the other buildings, which are mostly from the 1920s. The Casa was completed in 1828. And it's okay, I think, for it to look different and for it to have a different surface in the courtyard. But one that is still compatible. So I think one of the HLC commissioners had mentioned, making the surface of the Casa courtyard exactly the same as in the plaza. And I'm not sure that that's appropriate. I think it's nice to have continuity, but also have a threshold where you can step back in time and imagine what the Casa courtyard looked like when the family was living there in the earlier 19th century. So that's my final feedback here.
Thank you so much. And Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, Tristan, I support the simplified design. I think if there are ways to kind of mute or make the geometrical elements more subtle or modify those, I think it could only benefit. It allows the trees, the art, what's most important, my opinion, the architectural and historic beauty, the surrounding buildings to really kind of be the star of the show. And then one question, just as we consider all the elements of today and everything else HLC reviewed, Mr. Hess, has there been like a consolidation of public comment over the past 15 months, or is there a way to effectively gather those comments for our review? I mean, I really want to make sure we're intentional in driving the design of this plaza by like what we're hearing majority support from the public in.
Commissioner Reed, I think we haven't consolidated it all into one document, but it's within all of the minutes, but we can certainly do that. I think that would be productive.
Thank you. And then I would like to just make a comment here too. I think we are ready for a joint meeting. I would ask that, it sounds like most members, if not all, of this subcommittee or this advisory committee have watched the HLC comments so that we're up to date. And if members of HLC would watch the previous two meetings that we've held, where we really laid out the lighting and some of those different elevations, and then in preparation for a joint work session, that we have some elevations where we're really talking about the same viewpoint, I think would be extremely helpful. And it may take some time before those are ready and before we can have that joint meeting. I think it's most important that we all have those materials together to be able to effectively have those conversations. But I'm in full support, and I think it's a wonderful idea. And thank you, Commissioner Longstreet. And I'm looking forward to that. So I agree that we don't have too much more to discuss without the conversation going both ways. And I think it'd be very productive. I'm also really satisfied with the discussion of the olive trees and their sort of sinuous pattern of growth that does add an element of randomness. So I think that's something that came up in HLC, it's come up here. And so that's something in the work session too, that we can really address how much randomness. And I am in favor of the simplicity. I find it very helpful, this updated rendering where it's the color schemes are more similar. And I think it does sort of help with that geometric impression of the patterning there. Let's do public comment. And I think Mr. Hess and Leif, if you have what you need from us, and if not, if you could let us know if there's more you need from us today. But I think this has been a very productive meeting. And if we could have public comment, and then we will just then hope that our next meeting is then a joint work session. Yeah, okay.
If I can, Chair Sneddon, on those lines, we have reached out, but we don't have any answer back as to the full Historic Landmarks Commission's interest. Clearly, Mr. Drury and Mr. House are interested, which is great, and we're hoping that the rest of the commission would feel the same. So once we get confirmation that that is something that we would like to do collectively, then we will then certainly create a plan for both sides, because I agree with you that homework and information needs to be exchanged prior to that meeting. Thank you.
And to Commissioner Reed's comments too, I think it would be helpful for HLC to have a recounting of the public process that led up to the formation of this advisory committee. And I think that comment, that public outreach and the output from that would be helpful as well. And then if we could have our cameras on for public comment, and thank you.
Chair Sneddon, there is a question from a member of the public stating, considering the removal of critically important parking around the plaza, where will the new accessible blue parking spaces be located to welcome and include those who are differently abled?
This is an excellent question, and one that we've discussed independently. I'm not sure with the full committee, but if Mr. Hess would want to comment on that at this time, I think it's warranted. Yeah.
Madam Chair, some of this still needs to be worked out. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we still don't have a demand analysis that fully informs us in terms of the parking that's going to be required for both the businesses and for City Hall business. But we do also know that we have a parking lot that has ADA spaces there. We just need to figure that part out. And unfortunately, we don't have all the information yet, but we're certainly working on it.
Thank you. And next public comment.
Great. So we will start with Anna Marie Gott and then Kim Cochran. Anna Marie Gott, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I just want to remind everyone that cities around the country are actually closing their splash pads. And I think that this particular issue needs to be addressed in a joint meeting and fully discussed. And let me tell you why they're closing them. It is because of the homeless population, vandalism, drug use, prostitution, as well as just the cleanliness of the water, which the filtration systems cannot handle. So I think that you've got a real problem with this, and you're going to have to pass a sit-light ordinance for this plaza. So I don't understand why you haven't done it now. The other issue with the splash pads is the cities have actually gone ahead and had to hire security whenever they had splash pads actually open. You know, I've got a question about a lot of things here, and I'm going to send you a separate email, which I hope that you'll forward. One of them is, you know, I don't know how you actually tell a story and incorporate the Chumash when you are really talking about enslavement, genocide, and racism. When California was taken over by the Spanish and then by the United States. I don't know how you do that and bring that into this plaza. And I'm just going to say, this is a plaza. This is not a splash pad. This is not an area that I think that we need to talk about economic revitalization, because that's what you're doing on State Street. I also do not like the fact that you are now saying that, you know, private companies are going to take over public space, and it looks like we're creating a private, you know, park for them and their customers to use and view. I would have a few more minutes of public comment, but I don't know that I'm able to continue. However, I would like to say that because this has been a public plaza and it has been used for gatherings, that we haven't talked about in a platform for community activists to use. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, and we look forward to your letter about the public we do the arcade and previous meetings, and I will send you the link for those. We've discussed the use for public speaking events, so we'll further that discussion as well. Next public comment.
It looks like Kim Cochran has left, so we will have Mary Louise Days, Fred Sweeney, and Richard Clausen. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute Mary Louise. Mary Louise, it looks like you're self-muted.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that the idea of having recorded history has, you can see some examples of it. Your house may tell you a little more. The Conservancy has visited a downtown with speaking about the different places. It's linked to the Conservancy's website. And also there are QR code emblems on the new signs at El Presidio de Santa Barbara State Park, where people can click on that and get more information on a particular sign. So the example can used for your purpose too.
Thank you, Ms. Days. You're breaking up and I'm not sure if you've concluded your public comment or if your connection's gone out. So if we maybe go to our next public speaker.
I've continued. I've concluded.
Oh, you're there. Okay.
The next speaker is Fred Sweeney. After that, we have Richard Clausen and then Antoinette Cordero. I will unmute Fred.
Oh, hi everyone, Madam Chair and committee. I sent some of you some information yesterday, but I didn't quite understand how to do all that. So I didn't get some to my good friend, Ms. Longstreet, who I've known forever, because I don't have her email, etc. But hopefully I can send it to others once I figure that out. Couple of big things. I could talk 2 hours on this, but I won't. I think one of the things that's maybe steering this off a little bit is we keep trying to look at this as if this was an Italianate, and I know the City Hall is Italianate architecture, but this is an Italian piazza. Our heritage comes from Andalusia, and so there is a much different use of geometric forms, etc., that were developed by the Moorish. So this idea of circles and symmetry is probably not in the direction that some of you expressed about trying to be more organic. And also then this effort of the notion of telling a story. You're telling a story in this plaza from prehistory, as Ms. Stedden pointed out, to current day. So yes, HLC may be looking for traditional outcomes, but also this notion of introducing today's technology, today's needs, such as a water element for children, is important, but maybe it doesn't need to be in the center. Maybe it can be on the edge, etc. There are a lot of things to think about. I participated in the art process for the airport terminal, for the Garden Street Public Works building, the Chumash prints. I participated in all those processes, and I know that it can be done, and I would encourage you to continue to pursue that effort. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Richard Clausen. I will unmute you. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm generally a casual viewer of this committee, but I have to say, wow, what a great meeting. And I really look forward to the joint meeting with HLC. Because I haven't seen all of the meetings, the prior meetings, I don't know whether this has been brought up, and I apologize in advance, but I'd like the committee to be aware of the Paseo grid in Santa Barbara and how to make De la Guerra Plaza be more of a main hub for that, if there's any way to do that. I was struck by Commissioner Perry's and Dr. Peterson's later suggestion not to detract from the importance of De la Guerra, the Casa De la Guerra. I think that's important. Chair Snedden, I sent you an image of Siena in Italy, which is a very popular center city plaza that has no water feature in it, and it does very well. I liked Commissioner Perry's comment about the West Side businesses being involved with temporary umbrellas and whatnot and seating. I felt Mr. Hess's idea of QR codes is a good one. And about 4 years ago, I suggested that to Park and Rec Commission for medallions on Franceschi House. So I like that idea for providing more in-depth information to visitors. I think that with the twin features in the plaza, as it's shown from the aerial view now, the plaza takes on the image of sort of the Roman Circus Maximus with this long oval. And so I'm not a fan of that. And then finally, I think that if you consider olive trees, please consider getting the fruitless ones. If you drive down Olive Street, you will see how the pavement is discolored after decades of tree droppings and whatnot. And if you want that in the plaza to make it look good or old, fine, but understand that that the people stepping on dropped olives will discolor your base. Thank you.
Thank you.
Antoinette Cordero, I will go ahead and unmute you. It looks like you're self-muted, Antoinette. Did you still want to comment?
Yes, am I still, I don't know how to unmute myself.
We got it. We can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. I came to this meeting a little late, so I apologize if you've already addressed these issues, but I'm struggling here to figure out what the project objective is here and what you're trying to achieve in terms of drastically altering the current, what's currently there at Guerra Plaza. I'm grateful to hear someone at the end of your meeting mention the need to make sure that whatever you come up with, or whatever we'll come up with, is consistent with how this space is used by the community, because the current configuration or proposed configuration doesn't seem to, I mean, I'm trying to imagine what the plaza will look like during Fiesta, because it seems odd, unlikely that it will be anything like it has in the past. Also, with the trend being to move more and more toward native plants and natural features, I'm curious why you've chosen such an artificial design for this plaza. Even grass is better than concrete. So I'm really, I don't see how this actually improves on what we currently have. And I also just want to echo the statement that that your first speaker made about one of your first speakers about the sense that this is taking public space for private and converting it for private use and for profit use. So I just hope you will consider all of those and actually try to come up with a more natural design that doesn't have so much impervious surface, going to contribute to runoff and heat reflection and heat radiation. Those are my comments.
Thank you so much. And I'm happy to follow up with you, Ms. Cordero, on some of these questions that have been addressed in previous meetings. And I think it would be helpful to just have a conversation about some of those elements and to hear in more detail your thoughts. Is there any more public comment? Thank you.
Chair Snedden, Anna Marie Gaw would like to make a general public comment. Would you be okay with that?
Yes, and then we'll conclude the meeting. Yeah.
Perfect. Anna Marie Gaw, I will go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead and start.
Okay, so I take it that you've closed the previous item. So this is my general public comment, and I just want to reiterate, the discussion that the city has had in terms of allowing businesses to operate in public space and in the public right of way. I find it offensive that we are not charging 1/2 of the per square footage rate that a business is charging for a property for rent. We are simply subsidizing the private development because we are actually allowing businesses right now to operate, and it sounds like it's in the future as well, to operate in our public places for free. And I find it extraordinarily offensive that we are actually talking about a space where right now, of the 4 sides, there is one side that is actually for businesses, and we have outdoor dining strewn across our public right-of-way. And it really does appear that we are creating additional economic revenue space for those businesses and no one else. So I think that that's something that must be addressed. And I think that you are really not looking at, in terms of the entire city council, looking at the absolute misuse of public land for private profit. And I think it's hurting our residents, and it's not what you should be focusing on. You need to actually ensure that we get fair market value for anything that occurs in our public right-of-way or public spaces that is going to be generating income for another private business. So that is my general public comment, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, and that was a general comment, not to this meeting, because as a reminder, for today, there's no discussion of using this plaza for commercial extension. I think one commissioner mentioned that we should talk to the business owners, but there was no general consensus or movement toward allowing the use of this public space for private use. So just to really clearly delineate that and not start down that route. So that was a general public comment, probably for council. And with that, excellent discussion today, and look forward to our future meeting, and hopefully HLC would like to also meet with us in a working group type setting. And with that, we are adjourned.